On September 24, 2025, a sniper's bullets shattered the dawn at a Dallas ICE facility, causing casualties.
The shooter fired indiscriminately into vehicles. The detainees were in the vehicle at the time. They weren't outside.
Hours later, the feds struck back, smashing a massive cartel chemical shipment worth millions.
We've always been operating lately with the increased rhetoric and the assaults on ICE officers, but definitely we'll go ahead and reevaluate how we're doing operations.
But was this deadly attack really the work of an anti-ICE extremist or something far more sinister? The truth is what we are about to find out. Sniper fire and federal blood, the Dallas ICE attack that changed everything.
Early evidence that we've seen from rounds that were found near the suspected shooter contain messages that are anti-nature.
At 6:40 a.m. on September 24, 2025, the war between federal immigration enforcement and its enemies took a deadly turn in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, Texas. A lone gunman opened fire from a nearby rooftop on the ICE Dallas field office, using what authorities described as a high-powered AR-style rifle to unleash hell on what should have been a routine morning at the federal facility. Per the ICE director, Todd Lyons,
the shooter fired indiscriminately into vehicles. The detainees were in the vehicle at the time. They weren't outside. There was no way he could have known detainees were in there. 3 detainees were hit. 1, unfortunately, was killed. The sniper did commit suicide by a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
The shooter, positioned approximately 100 to 150 yards away, had chosen his vantage point with chilling precision. From that rooftop, he commanded a clear line of sight to the facility's sally port, the secured entryway where ICE detainees are processed for deportation. What unfolded next would become one of the most brazen attacks on federal law enforcement in recent memory, leaving investigators grappling with evidence that pointed to something far more complex than a simple act of domestic terrorism. The gunman fired an estimated 20 to 30 rounds indiscriminately at the facility, his bullets finding their mark in the most tragic way possible. Inside an unmarked transport van in the sally port sat 3 ICE detainees, 2 men and 1 woman, all in their 30s, all with prior convictions for drug trafficking and assault. These weren't innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. They were individuals being processed through the deportation system, waiting in what should have been a secure federal facility. A 34-year-old Mexican national was killed instantly by a headshot, while the other 2 suffered critical injuries requiring emergency surgery at Parkland Memorial Hospital. One victim sustained severe torso wounds, the other devastating leg injuries that would forever change their lives. The building itself bore the scars of the assault. Bullet holes pierced windows, an interior American flag display case was shattered, and the facility's exterior showed clear signs of the sustained gunfire. What makes this attack particularly chilling is what didn't happen. No ICE agents or staff were injured, despite the indiscriminate nature of the shooting. The early morning timing, when fewer personnel were present, may have saved federal lives, but it also raises questions about whether this timing was intentional or simply fortunate for the shooter's twisted agenda. Within 5 minutes of unleashing his barrage, the gunman ceased firing. When Dallas Police Department officers and ICE agents secured the scene 45 minutes later, they discovered the shooter's body on the rooftop, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. But the evidence they recovered painted a picture of meticulous planning that went far beyond a spontaneous act of violence.
What's even scarier is the location where the field office is. There's businesses around there. Busy I-35, 6:40 in the morning. People going to school, people going to work. He had a high-powered rifle. He could have, in his indiscriminate fire, hit people traveling to work, civilians on the ground. A very scary situation.
The tactical gear found alongside the shooter's body told a story of preparation and premeditation. Investigators recovered AR-style rifles, 2-way radios, 12 sets of body armor, and Faraday bags, sophisticated signal jamming devices designed to evade electronic tracking. This wasn't the equipment of an impulsive individual. This was the arsenal of someone who had planned extensively for this moment. But perhaps the most chilling evidence came in the form of 5 unspent bullet casings, each one carefully engraved with the message anti-ICE. FBI Director Kash Patel would later describe this as a politically motivated attack against law enforcement, linking it directly to rising anti-ICE rhetoric from leftist activists across the nation. The shooter was quickly identified as 29-year-old Joshua John, a former U.S. Army veteran from the Dallas suburb of McKinney. His identification came through a combination of forensic evidence, digital footprints, and traditional investigative methods that painted a complex portrait portrait of a man driven by ideological hatred. On-scene evidence provided the first leads, personal effects including a wallet and phone that matched Texas DMV records by 8 a.m. But it was the deeper investigation that revealed the true scope of John's radicalization. FBI raids on 2 addresses connected to the shooter uncovered a digital trail of anti-ICE manifestos and social media posts under pseudonyms that revealed his descent into extremist ideology. John's voting record showed participation in the 2020 Democratic primary, while his deleted social media profiles featured Antifa symbols and communist imagery, including a profile picture of an armed figure with a hammer and sickle. His posts consistently criticized President Trump's deportation policies, praised Antifa tactics, and referred to ICE as deportation terrorists engaged in systematic oppression of immigrant communities. The public reaction to this deadly assault split along predictable partisan lines, but with an intensity that reflected the deep polarization surrounding immigration enforcement in 2025. Within hours, the hashtag #DallasICE attack was trending on X, generating over 300,000 posts by evening as Americans grappled with the implications of this brazen attack on federal law enforcement. Conservative voices immediately seized on the attack as validation of their warnings about leftist extremism. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem called it a vile attack motivated by hatred for ICE, urging politicians to tone down rhetoric in a statement that was viewed over 5 million times across social media platforms. President Trump's response was characteristically blunt and direct. Posting on Truth Social, he wrote, "Deranged shooter wrote anti-ICE on shell casings. Despicable. Brave ICE heroes face radical leftist attacks." The message encapsulated the administration's narrative that this was part of a broader pattern of leftist violence against federal law enforcement. Vice President J.D. Vance took aim at Democratic politicians, stating bluntly,
"You don't have to agree with my immigration policies. You don't have to agree with Donald Trump's immigration policies. But if your political rhetoric encourages violence against our law enforcement, you can go straight to hell and you have no place in the political conversation of the United States of America."
His comments specifically targeted figures like California Governor Gavin Newsom, whom Republicans accused of creating an atmosphere of hostility toward ICE through sanctuary state policies and inflammatory rhetoric. On the other side of the political divide, progressive voices initially struggled with assumptions that proved embarrassingly wrong. Early posts from left-leaning users assumed a right-wing shooter targeting immigrants, with some warning of potential riots similar to the George Floyd protests. These posts, viewed by tens of thousands before being retracted or clarified, revealed the deep-seated expectations about political violence in contemporary America. The revelation of John's actual motive forced a rapid recalibration of progressive messaging. Figures like Jon Favreau criticized Vice President Vance's remarks, noting that the victims were detainees rather than agents, and questioned whether ICE rhetoric could be directly linked to this specific act of violence. His post generated over 20,000 replies, many debating the relationship between political rhetoric and real-world violence. Brian Krasenstein initially framed the incident as part of a broader pattern of white male violence, but faced significant backlash for his premature assumptions. His post received 37,000 likes, but over 7,000 critical replies, highlighting the volatile nature of political discourse in the immediate aftermath of the attack. Meanwhile, Latino advocacy groups expressed fears that the incident would be used to justify increased enforcement actions and potential backlash against immigrant communities. One representative stated, "The immigrant community feels targeted, not just ICE," reflecting concerns about how this attack might be weaponized politically. The timing of this attack wasn't lost on observers who noted its proximity to other incidents targeting ICE facilities. This was the 4th attack against ICE facilities in Texas in 2025, part of what DHS reported as a 300% increase in threats against ICE personnel since January. The most significant of these was the July 4th Alvarado ambush, where 10 Antifa-linked suspects used fireworks and AR-15s to wound a police officer outside another ICE facility. The tactical similarities between that coordinated assault and John's lone wolf attack suggested either copycat behavior or possible coordination among anti-ICE extremists. But even as the official narrative of ideological extremism took hold, alternative theories began emerging on social media platforms and alternative news sites. The timing of the attack, mere hours before a massive ICE seizure of cartel-bound chemicals, struck some observers as more than mere coincidence. The cartel retaliation theory gained traction among users who pointed to the sophisticated nature of John's preparation and the military precision of his positioning. Proponents argued that Mexican cartels, particularly the Sinaloa organization recently designated as a foreign terrorist organization, had both the motive and capability to orchestrate such an attack through proxies. These theorists highlighted John's veteran status as providing perfect cover cover for what they claimed was actually a cartel-sponsored hit designed to intimidate ICE agents involved in aggressive enforcement operations. The engraved bullet casings, rather than evidence of ideological motivation, were framed as misdirection designed to obscure the true sponsors of the violence. Other conspiracy theories emerged around claims that the attack was a false flag operation designed to justify expanded ICE powers and funding. These voices questioned the rapid identification of John and the public display of the engraved casings, suggesting the evidence was too convenient and the timeline too clean for a genuine lone wolf attack. Skeptical voices like at Sandibachom questioned the authenticity of the bullet engravings, posting, "Nobody writes anti-ICE on a bullet if they're against ICE. This is FBI theater to ramp up deportations. John's a patsy. Look at the clean scene, no struggle." This post was viewed over 50,000 times and sparked hundreds of replies debating the evidence. The attack cost an estimated $2 million in investigation and damages, while the broader implications for ICE security and operations continue to reverberate through federal law enforcement. The facility sustained $50,000 to $100,000 in direct structural damage, but the psychological impact on ICE personnel nationwide has proven far more significant. As investigators continue piecing together the full scope of John's radicalization and planning, the attack stands as a stark reminder of how America's immigration debate has devolved into something approaching actual warfare. The professional competence of ICE agents, the vulnerability of federal facilities, and the willingness of extremists to resort to lethal violence have all been called into question by this single morning of bloodshed in Dallas. Chemical warfare and cartel billions inside ICE's massive counterstrike. Just hours after the Dallas ICE facility shooting sent shockwaves through federal law enforcement, agents struck back with devastating precision against the very cartels many suspected were behind the escalating violence. At approximately 2 p.m. Central Daylight Time on September 24th, ICE's Homeland Security Investigations Unit coordinated with Customs and Border Protection to seize approximately 25,000 kilograms of methamphetamine precursor chemicals from a nondescript warehouse in Irving, Texas. The timing was remarkable, and to some observers, suspiciously convenient. Within 8 hours of bullets ripping through their Dallas facility, ICE agents were systematically destroying $150 million worth of chemicals bound for Sinaloa cartel superlabs in Mexico. The shipment, consisting primarily of glacial acetic acid and ephedrine derivatives, represented enough raw materials to produce approximately 10 million lethal doses of methamphetamine. This wasn't some hastily organized retaliation strike. The Irving warehouse seizure was the culmination of months of painstaking intelligence work under ICE's Operation Crystal Clear, a sophisticated program that uses artificial intelligence-driven analytics to track precursor chemical shipments from Asian suppliers to Mexican cartels. The chemicals had originated in China, transited through the port of Long Beach in California, and were destined for clandestine laboratories operated by the Sinaloa cartel, the same organization that President Trump had designated as a foreign terrorist organization just months earlier. The operation unfolded with military precision. Over 50 HSI special agents and CBP officers descended on the 10,000-square-foot industrial facility, encountering no resistance from the skeleton crew managing what appeared to be a legitimate import business. But appearances deceive in the shadow world of cartel logistics, and this warehouse represented a critical node in the international supply chain that floods American streets with synthetic drugs. The chemicals were stored in 500 industrial drums, each one carefully labeled with innocuous descriptions that would fool casual inspection. But ICE's intelligence networks had flagged anomalies in the shipping manifests, unusual routing patterns, mislabeled cargo, and financial transactions that pointed to the sophisticated money laundering operations that fund cartel activities across North America. 2 Mexican nationals were arrested on site, identified by federal authorities as mid-level Sinaloa logistics coordinators responsible for managing the distribution network that would have moved these chemicals across the border. They faced charges of narco-trafficking, conspiracy, and money laundering under the enhanced foreign terrorist organization provisions that unlock terrorism-level penalties for cartel operations. The evidence seized painted a picture of staggering criminal sophistication. Encrypted ledgers detailed financial transactions spanning multiple countries and currencies. Burner phones contained communications with cartel operatives across Mexico and the southwestern United States. Hidden in vehicle compartments, agents discovered $200,000 in cash, pocket change. In the multi-billion-dollar world of international drug trafficking, but significant evidence of the operation's scope and profitability. But perhaps the most symbolic moment came when ICE agents began the systematic destruction of the chemical stockpile. Using industrial shredders and high-temperature incinerators, they smashed the precursors under controlled Environmental Protection Agency guidelines, rendering them utterly unusable while creating dramatic footage of America's determination to disrupt cartel supply chains. The scale of this chemical war is staggering. A March 2025 operation seized 44,000 kilograms of glacial acetic acid at the port of Houston, leading to the exposure and elimination of 2 Sinaloa superlabs. A June operation at the same port interdicted 50,000 kilograms, resulting in 13 laboratory closures across Mexico. But the crown jewel of this enforcement campaign came in September, when federal agents intercepted a record-breaking 697,000 pounds of precursor chemicals off the coast of Panama, a shipment so massive it required 24 semi-trucks for transport and represented enough raw materials to flood American cities with methamphetamine for months. These operations have measurably impacted cartel capabilities. DEA estimates suggest that Sinaloa's methamphetamine output has been reduced by 25% year-to-date, while the organization's operational costs have skyrocketed as they struggle to replace disrupted supply chains and compromised logistics networks. The Foreign Terrorist Organization designation has proven particularly devastating for cartel operations. This legal framework, typically reserved for groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, unlocks terrorism forfeiture laws, expanded surveillance authorities, and military-assisted interdictions that treat cartels as enemy combatants rather than mere criminal organizations. Joint operations with the DEA, FBI, and Department of Defense have enabled kinetic strikes that would have been unthinkable under previous administrations. The September military action against Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists off Venezuela demonstrated America's willingness to use lethal force against cartel operations that threaten national security. In Texas alone, the primary corridor for methamphetamine entering the United States, ICE has conducted over 200 precursor busts in 2025, representing a 150% increase from the previous year. The surge in enforcement activity has occurred amid what DHS describes as a 300% rise in cartel threats against federal agents. The challenge is magnified by China's role as the source of approximately 80% of global precursor chemicals. Despite diplomatic pressure and targeted sanctions against companies like Guangzhou Tengyue Chemical Company, Chinese manufacturers continue supplying the raw materials that fuel Mexico's synthetic drug industry. ICE's response has been to expand artificial intelligence tools that can identify suspicious shipping patterns and strengthen bilateral pressure on Beijing to crack down on chemical exports. The goal is ambitious: a 50% reduction in methamphetamine inflows by 2026 through a combination of interdiction, diplomacy, and disruption. But the symbolic power of this timing cannot be ignored. While extremists attacked ICE personnel in Dallas, federal agents were simultaneously dismantling cartel infrastructure worth more than most small countries' annual budgets. The message to both domestic terrorists and international criminals was clear: attacks on federal law enforcement will be met with overwhelming response. This dual-front war against domestic extremists and international cartels has stretched ICE resources to their breaking limits while demonstrating the agency's continued effectiveness despite facing unprecedented threats. The success of operations like Crystal Clear provides ammunition for supporters who argue that aggressive enforcement saves American lives, while critics point to the human costs of mass deportation and militarized immigration policy. The Irving chemical seizure stands as a testament to federal law enforcement's technical capabilities and operational sophistication, but it also highlights the endless nature of this conflict, where every victory is temporary and every seizure represents just a fraction of the total supply chain that continues operating across international borders. Blood money and broken systems, ICE under fire from all sides. The escalating violence against ICE facilities in 2025 has exposed deep fractures in American society while raising uncomfortable questions about the human costs of aggressive immigration enforcement. What began as policy disagreements over deportation priorities has metastasized into something approaching domestic warfare, with federal agents caught between criminal cartels, political extremists, and their own institutional failures. DHS reports an 830% increase in assaults on ICE officers from January through July 2025, a statistic that climbed to over 1,000% by September as President Trump's mass deportation policies reached full implementation. This surge in violence reflects not just political opposition to immigration enforcement, but a fundamental breakdown in the social contract that once protected federal law enforcement from direct attack. The July 4th Alvarado ambush stands as perhaps the most chilling example of this escalation. At the Prairieland Detention Center, 10 to 12 individuals in black tactical gear executed a coordinated assault that wounded an Alvarado Alvarado Police Department officer and could have resulted in mass casualties among ICE personnel. The attack unfolded with military precision that suggested extensive planning and training. Beginning at 10:37 p.m. on Independence Day, the assailants used commercial-grade fireworks as a distraction while positioning snipers in nearby woods. They scattered anarchist propaganda featuring QR codes linking to manifestos demanding the abolition of ICE and decrying Trump's designation of the Sinaloa Cartel as a foreign terrorist organization. The tactical sophistication was breathtaking. The attackers used AR-15-style rifles, body armor, ballistic helmets, two-way radios tuned to police frequencies, and Faraday bags to block electronic signals. When Alvarado police officer Elena Ramirez arrived on scene, a flashlight signal from the woods triggered coordinated gunfire that struck her in the neck, fragmenting her clavicle and lodging in her trapezius muscle. Only a rifle malfunction prevented what could have been a massacre. When one of the weapons jammed after 8 rounds, the shooters fled into wooded terrain, abandoning their equipment and propaganda materials. The subsequent investigation revealed connections to North Texas Antifa, the John Brown Gun Club, and the Socialist Rifle Association, organizations that have increasingly embraced armed resistance to federal immigration enforcement. 11 individuals have been charged federally, with 10 arrested initially, and Benjamin Hennell's song captured in September after Governor Greg Abbott offered a $10,000 reward. The suspects, primarily Texas residents in their 20s through 40s, represent a cross-section of middle-class radicals with no violent criminal histories, but extensive involvement in protest movements. The evidence against them reads like a manual for domestic terrorism. Encrypted signal communications detailed weeks of reconnaissance, including drone footage of facility perimeters and guard schedules. Military surplus gear was stockpiled at a Dallas activist compound known for transgender rights organizing and Antifa coordination. Purchase records showed that Song, a former Marine reservist, had acquired 4 firearms through private sales specifically to evade background check requirements. The charges they face reflect the serious nature of their crimes: 3 counts each of attempted murder of a federal officer and firearm discharge in a violent crime, carrying mandatory minimum sentences of 10 years per count and potential life imprisonment. State charges include terrorism and aggravated assault on a public servant, underscoring Texas authorities' determination to treat this as the domestic terrorism it clearly represents. But the Alvarado ambush was just one incident in a pattern of escalating violence that has transformed routine ICE operations into high-risk military exercises. The Boulder firebombing in June killed 1 detainee and injured 12 others when protesters breached facility perimeters and hurled Molotov cocktails into holding cells. Portland riots in July resulted in agents being physically assaulted and their personal information being doxed online, forcing family relocations and security upgrades. These attacks occur against a backdrop of institutional controversies that have plagued ICE for years, but reached new intensity under Trump's expanded enforcement mandate. Human rights organizations document systematic patterns of abuse that include racial profiling, wrongful detentions, inhumane conditions, and due process violations that disproportionately affect Latino and Black communities. The racial profiling allegations are particularly damaging because they strike at fundamental constitutional protections. ICE's use of roving patrols in areas with significant Latino populations has resulted in numerous cases where U.S. citizens and legal residents have been detained based primarily on their appearance, language, or occupation, rather than specific evidence of immigration violations. During Operation Liquid Death in June, a joint ICE-DEA raid targeting CJNG human smuggling routes in the Rio Grande Valley detained 72 individuals, including 15 U.S. citizens who were held for extended periods while agents verified their status. Among them was Elzon Lemus, a naturalized Salvadoran veteran and truck driver who spent 48 hours in custody after agents flagged his accent and cargo as suspicious indicators of criminal activity. The pattern repeats across multiple operations. Imperial Valley's Sinaloa fentanyl network bust in March resulted in 47 Latino farm workers being arrested, despite only 20% having actual cartel connections. Many were legal H-2A visa holders separated from their families for weeks while their immigration status was verified through bureaucratic processes that seemed designed more for intimidation than investigation. Even more troubling are the documented cases of wrongful deportations involving U.S. citizens and legal residents caught up in ICE's aggressive enforcement quotas. CNN's June investigation identified over 100 such cases since January, including family separations that have torn apart mixed-status households across the country. The case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia illustrates the human cost of these errors. The Salvadoran asylum seeker was wrongfully deported in August, despite having valid claims for protection, then re-detained in September in Maryland, facing removal to Uganda, a country with which he has no connection whatsoever. His lawyer's filings describe a Kafkaesque system where speed takes precedence over accuracy accuracy and due process becomes a luxury that few can afford. Perhaps most heartbreaking are the cases involving children caught in ICE's expanded dragnet. A 4-year-old U.S. citizen boy with stage 4 cancer was separated from his deported Guatemalan mother in July and denied medication during a 3-day transit period that his doctors describe as potentially life-threatening. An 11-year-old girl with brain cancer in Georgia was denied chemotherapy for 5 days during an immigration transfer, according to Senator John Ossoff's September investigation. These medical crises reflect broader systemic problems with ICE detention facilities that have reached crisis levels under the strain of increased enforcement. With capacity expanded to over 260,000 across 146 sites, a 50% increase from 2024, overcrowding has reached 200% in some facilities, creating conditions that medical professionals describe as inhumane. Physicians for Human Rights documents that 95% of deaths in ICE custody between 2017 and 2021 were preventable, a statistic that appears to be continuing under current conditions. Private prison companies that hold 80% of ICE detention contracts profit from volume rather than quality of care, creating perverse incentives that prioritize occupancy rates over human dignity. The conditions documented in recent investigations read like something from a developing world humanitarian crisis rather than a wealthy democracy's immigration system. Florida's Chrome and Broward facilities, inspected by Human Rights Watch in July, housed detainees in conditions lacking clean water for days at a time, with moldy food and excessive use of solitary confinement for minor infractions like protesting conditions or requesting medical care. Due process violations have become routine under ICE's accelerated enforcement timeline. A July 8th memo by Acting Director Todd Lyons reclassified long-term residents as applicants for admission, mandating detention without bond, a policy that over 50 federal judges have ruled illegal, but which continues to be implemented across multiple jurisdictions. The fast-track deportation system has created an assembly line approach to immigration enforcement that treats human beings as processing statistics rather than individuals with constitutional rights. Courthouse arrests that skip immigration hearings entirely have become common, while ICE's 3,000 daily arrest quotas create pressure for agents to prioritize numbers over accuracy. These systemic problems have created a feedback loop of violence and retaliation that threatens to spiral completely out of control. Each documented abuse fuels more extremist recruitment, while each attack on ICE facilities justifies more aggressive enforcement measures that create more opportunities for abuse. Social media has become a battleground where these competing narratives clash daily. Conservative voices defend ICE as necessary for national security, while progressive activists document abuse after abuse in real time. The echo chambers have become so complete that Americans increasingly live in alternate realities where the same events are interpreted as either heroic law enforcement or systematic oppression. The resource diversion required for immigration enforcement has stretched federal agencies beyond their breaking points while neglecting other critical law enforcement priorities. Reassigning over 2,000 FBI, DEA, and ATF agents to ICE operations has created gaps in narcotics investigations, counterterrorism activities, and white-collar crime enforcement that will take years to address. Agent burnout has reached crisis levels, with reports of 1,000% increases in assaults against ICE personnel, creating an atmosphere of constant danger that few federal law enforcement positions have historically required. The psychological toll of conducting raids in communities where agents are viewed as occupying forces rather than protectors has led to unprecedented turnover rates and recruitment challenges, as Senator Ossoff's September investigation revealed 510 credible abuse cases requiring immediate attention. The fundamental question facing American immigration policy becomes whether current enforcement strategies are sustainable, either operationally or morally. The violence against ICE facilities represents symptoms of deeper systemic failures that cannot be solved through increased security measures or harsher penalties alone. The Dallas ICE shooting, the chemical seizures, and the broader pattern of violence and abuse represent different facets of the same crisis. A broken immigration system that has devolved into something resembling low-intensity warfare between federal authorities and the communities they ostensibly serve to protect. That's all for today, and thank you for watching. For more of such content, click on the card showing on the screen.